Grand Senate hearing room buzzed with the usual activity as lawmakers gathered to discuss a significant economic justice bill. Senator Bernie Sanders, his familiar silver hair slightly disheveled, sat attentively at the committee dais. At 82, the veteran progressive icon had spent decades fighting for economic fairness, his Brooklyn accent and passionate delivery instantly recognizable to millions of Americans. Across the room, freshman Representative Jasmine Crockett was preparing to testify. Though relatively new to Congress, she had quickly established herself as a rising voice for justice issues, particularly for underserved communities. Few expected what was about to unfold between these two public servants from different generations, but similar ideals. Crockett had just finished delivering a powerful, meticulously researched testimony about economic disparities in her district. She had presented compelling statistics while weaving in stories of real constituents: the single mother working 3 jobs, the elderly couple choosing between medicine and food, the young graduates drowning in student debt. What happened next left the chamber in a moment of reverent silence. Sanders, who typically used his time to deliver passionate critiques of economic inequality, instead removed his reading glasses, looked directly at Crockett, and with genuine admiration in his voice said, "Representative Crockett, I've been fighting for economic justice for over 40 years in these halls. Today, your testimony reminds me why this fight matters so much. The clarity and moral conviction with which you've spoken for those without a voice in this chamber. That's exactly what America needs more of right now." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't political theater or calculated messaging. It was a moment of genuine respect from one of America's most prominent progressive voices to a rising leader carrying that same torch forward. Before we continue this remarkable story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates moments when our political leaders rise above division to show the respect and integrity that true public service demands. To understand why this moment between Senator Sanders and Representative Crockett resonated so deeply with Americans across the political spectrum, it's important to appreciate the unique journeys and authentic characters of these two public servants. Bernie Sanders, born in 1941 to a Polish-Jewish immigrant family in Brooklyn, had traveled a long and principled path to the Senate. His political awakening began during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, where, as a college student, he joined protests against segregation. After moving to Vermont, he served as mayor of Burlington before being elected to Congress and eventually the Senate. Throughout his long career, Sanders had maintained a remarkable consistency in his advocacy for economic justice. Long before terms like income inequality became common political language, Sanders was raising these concerns, often as a lone voice. His 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns had transformed him from a respected but somewhat marginal figure into a national movement leader who had fundamentally shifted American political discourse around economic issues. Those who knew Sanders personally often spoke of qualities the cameras rarely captured. Behind his sometimes gruff exterior and passionate rhetoric was a person of genuine humility and deep empathy. A former aide once noted, "The Bernie you see arguing passionately on the Senate floor is the same Bernie who remembers the names of the maintenance staff and asks about their families." Representative Jasmine Crockett had traveled a different path to Congress, but was animated by similar concerns for justice. A civil rights attorney before entering politics, she had represented clients who couldn't afford high-priced legal representation, fighting against systemic inequalities in the justice system. Her transition to politics came from a realization that many of the problems she encountered as an attorney required systemic policy solutions. Elected to Congress in a closely watched race, Crockett had quickly distinguished herself through her precise legal analysis combined with passionate advocacy. Unlike many first-term representatives who took time to find their voice, she arrived with both the legal expertise to dissect complex policy issues and the communication skills to make those issues accessible to everyday Americans. Like Sanders, colleagues noted Crockett's authenticity and work ethic. A fellow representative once observed, "What you see on C-SPAN is exactly who she is in private meetings. There's no performance, just consistent principles and a genuine concern for the people she represents." The economic justice hearing that brought them together focused on expanding opportunity in underserved communities. The proposed legislation included provisions for community development, financial institutions, affordable housing initiatives, and workforce development programs. Issues both Sanders and Crockett had long championed from their respective positions. We'd love to hear in the comments section if you've ever witnessed a moment where someone from an older generation recognized and supported the efforts of someone younger carrying forward important work. These moments of intergenerational respect remind us of the continuity of our shared values and aspirations. The atmosphere before their exchange reflected the usual partisan divisions of Washington. Republican members had expressed concerns about the cost and scope of the proposed programs, while Democratic members focused on the urgent needs the bill aimed to address. Staff members quietly exchanged talking points, while journalists prepared to report on the expected political theater. What no one anticipated was that this routine hearing would produce a moment that would soon inspire millions of Americans with a reminder of what political leadership at its best can look like. The hearing had begun with standard procedure, opening statements from committee leadership, followed by testimony from economic experts and community representatives. As often happens in such hearings, many committee members use their question time to deliver mini speeches reinforcing their pre-existing positions, rather than engaging substantively with the witnesses. When Representative Crockett's turn came to testify, she took an approach that immediately distinguished her presentation. Rather than offering generic support for the legislation or abstract policy arguments, she brought the reality of economic inequality into sharp focus through concrete examples from her district. In the Jenkins Heights neighborhood, she began, the median household income is $24,300 per year, while just 3 miles away in Lakeside, it's $142,000. This isn't just a statistic. It translates into drastically different life outcomes, from education to healthcare to life expectancy. She methodically connected these local realities to broader patterns, presenting research data showing how economic disparities perpetuated across generations without targeted intervention. What made her testimony particularly compelling was her ability to weave together rigorous analysis with the human stories behind the numbers. Ms. Wilson, a constituent I met during a community meeting, works as a certified nursing assistant at 3 different facilities to support her family, Crockett explained. She leaves home at 5 a.m. and often doesn't return until after her children are asleep. Despite working more than 60 hours weekly, she still struggles to cover basic necessities. Her story isn't unique. It represents millions of Americans who work full-time but cannot achieve financial security. Crockett didn't just identify problems. She outlined specific solutions, explaining how community development financial institutions could increase access to capital for small businesses in underserved areas, how affordable housing initiatives could stabilize families, and how workforce development programs could create pathways to higher-paying careers. Throughout her testimony, Crockett demonstrated both deep knowledge of policy mechanisms and a clear moral vision about the purpose of those policies. She acknowledged legitimate concerns about program effectiveness and accountability, while making a compelling case that the status quo was simply unacceptable in a nation founded on principles of equality and opportunity. These aren't abstract issues for debate, she concluded. They're about whether we truly believe that every American deserves a fair chance to thrive based on their efforts and abilities, not the zip code they were born in or the wealth of their parents. As Crockett finished her testimony, Senator Sanders, who had been listening intently throughout, signaled to the committee chair that he wished to speak. Given his seniority and prominence, the chair immediately recognized him for questions. Those familiar with Sanders' typical committee performances expected him to use Crockett's testimony as a launching point for one of his characteristic passionate critiques of economic inequality, perhaps highlighting how the problems she identified connected to his long-standing concerns about corporate power, tax policy, or health care. Instead, Sanders began by acknowledging something more fundamental. "Representative Crockett," he said, removing his reading glasses and setting aside his prepared questions. "Before addressing the specifics of this legislation, I want to recognize something important that transcends our usual political discussions. The chamber grew quiet as Sanders continued, his Brooklyn accent more pronounced as he spoke from the heart rather than prepared remarks. I've been coming to hearings like this for several decades now. I've seen economic reports and poverty statistics presented year after year. What you've done today, connecting those numbers to the lived reality of your constituents while also offering concrete, practical solutions, that represents public service at its best. Sanders continued, "When I was mayor of Burlington many years ago, I walked neighborhoods where families face challenges similar to those you've described. I've seen how economic insecurity undermines not just material well-being, but human dignity itself. Your testimony today honors those experiences and reminds us all why these issues demand urgent attention." Committee members from both parties appeared surprised by Sanders' personal tone. Journalists who had been checking phones looked up, sensing they were witnessing something beyond the usual partisan positioning. Sanders then moved to more specific aspects of Crockett's testimony. The community banking proposal you outlined for underserved neighborhoods. Could you elaborate on how that model has worked in your district? I'm particularly interested in how we ensure those institutions remain accountable to community needs, rather than outside financial interests. What followed was a substantive exchange about policy mechanisms that might actually address the problems both Sanders and Crockett had identified. Rather than performing for cameras or scoring political points, they engaged in a genuine dialogue about how government could better serve those most in need of economic opportunity. Crockett explained how community development financial institutions in her district had successfully increased small business lending in neighborhoods traditionally underserved by mainstream banks. Sanders shared examples from Vermont, where similar approaches had created sustainable economic development in rural communities. Throughout their exchange, both demonstrated deep knowledge of the issues while maintaining focus on the people those policies would affect. This wasn't abstract theoretical discussion. It was practical problem-solving, grounded in shared values about economic fairness and opportunity. As Sanders' question time neared its end, he posed a final query that moved beyond specific policy details to something more fundamental. Representative Crockett, given your background as both an attorney and now a legislator working on these justice issues, what do you think makes the difference between policy discussions that lead to real change and those that simply perpetuate the status quo? It was a question that invited wisdom rather than talking points, and Crockett responded thoughtfully. Crockett took a moment to consider the question, recognizing its depth went beyond the specific legislation under discussion. The room grew quiet as she formulated her response. "That's perhaps the most important question we could be asking, Senator Sanders," she began with genuine appreciation. "In my experience, both in courtrooms and now in Congress, the difference often comes down to whether we remain connected to the lived realities of those we're trying to serve." She continued, "When policy becomes abstracted from human experience, when we discuss poverty rates without seeing the parent skipping meals so their child can eat, when we debate housing policy without understanding what housing insecurity does to a family's sense of safety and possibility, we lose the moral urgency that drives real change." Sanders nodded, clearly engaged with her perspective. "There's something else too," Crockett added. "Effective change requires both moral clarity about what's right and practical wisdom about what's possible. It means being uncompromising about our values while remaining flexible about the mechanisms to achieve them." She smiled slightly. "I've noticed in studying your career, Senator, that you've exemplified this approach, maintaining consistent principles about economic justice while adapting your strategies as circumstances changed. That's something I've tried to learn from." Sanders appeared genuinely moved by this recognition. His usual intense expression softened into something more reflective. "You know," he responded, "when I was about your age in politics, the conventional wisdom was that talking about economic inequality was political suicide. The issues you spoke about today, the struggles of working people, the concentration of wealth, the need for economic democracy, these were considered fringe concerns." He gestured toward the committee room. "What gives me hope, watching your testimony today, is seeing a new generation of leaders who are carrying these issues forward with both passion and precision. You're not just repeating slogans, you're advancing the work with new insights and approaches suited to this moment. This unexpected personal exchange changed something in the room. Committee members who had been reviewing papers or checking messages were now fully attentive. Staffers who had been preparing partisan response points set their tablets aside. Even journalists typically focused on conflict and controversy sensed they were witnessing something unusual and valuable. Sanders continued, his tone reflective rather than combative. Washington often incentivizes the wrong behaviors in public service. The media coverage, the fundraising pressures, the partisan scoring system. They all reward those who can deliver the sharpest attack lines or the most sensational claims. He leaned forward, making his point more directly. What rarely gets attention are the detailed, substantive contributions that actually move us towards solutions, the kind of testimony you offered today. That's why I felt it important to acknowledge. Crockett nodded in agreement. The incentives definitely push us toward performance rather than progress. But ultimately, we answer to the people we represent, not to the political scorekeepers. And most Americans I meet, regardless of their political affiliation, are much more interested in seeing real problems solved than in watching political theater. Sanders then said something that would soon be shared millions of times across social media platforms. Representative Crockett, your fight for justice reminds me why I entered public service decades ago. There are moments in this work when the daily frustrations and obstacles can make anyone question whether progress is possible. Then someone like you comes along, someone who combines moral passion with intellectual rigor, someone who speaks truth to power while also doing the detailed work of crafting solutions. He continued, that doesn't just honor the causes we both believe in. It renews my own faith in what's possible through democratic engagement. I want you to know that your work matters, not just to your constituents, but to everyone who believes that economic justice is essential to fulfilling America's promise. The committee chairman, recognizing the significance of this exchange, extended Sanders time to allow the conversation to continue. Sanders asked a follow-up question that further deepened the dialogue. Looking beyond this specific legislation, what do you see as the most promising pathways for advancing economic justice in communities like those you represent? Where might those of us who have been in this fight for many years direct our attention and support? Crockett's response reflected both practical experience and thoughtful analysis. I believe we need multi-level approaches that address both immediate needs and structural barriers. Community-based economic development must happen alongside broader systemic changes in how we structure opportunity, she continued. In practical terms, this means supporting grassroots economic initiatives like community land trusts and cooperative businesses that build local wealth and ownership. It means reform in education funding that breaks the link between zip codes and opportunity, and it requires rethinking how we value different types of work in our economy. Sanders engaged with the substance of her suggestions, adding insights from his own experience rather than looking for points to contest. Your approach makes sense. It reminds me of efforts I've supported in Vermont, where cooperatives and community-owned enterprises have created sustainable economic models that distribute benefits more equitably. As their extended exchange concluded, Sanders offered a final reflection that captured what many in the room were feeling. The work of economic justice is fundamentally intergenerational. Each generation builds upon the efforts of those who came before while bringing new insights and approaches. The fights for fair wages, affordable housing, and universal health care that I've been engaged in for decades, they continue through the work you and others are doing today. He paused, then continued with evident sincerity. Your testimony today, Representative Crockett, your clear-eyed analysis combined with genuine moral conviction, gives me great hope that this work continues in capable hands. Thank you for your service. The committee chairman, visibly moved by the exchange, thanked both members for reminding us what public service at its best can look like. Several other committee members from both parties nodded in agreement. As Sanders gathered his notes and Crockett prepared to leave the witness table, they shared a brief moment of connection, not a performative handshake for cameras, but a genuine look of mutual respect between two public servants committed to the same fundamental vision of a more just economy, though separated by generations and experience. The impact of the Sanders-Crockett exchange rippled outward from that hearing room in ways that surprised even veteran political observers. Within hours, video clips of their interaction began circulating online, not just in progressive circles, but across diverse communities and viewpoints. What made the exchange so compelling wasn't political theater or confrontation, but rather its authenticity. Two public servants genuinely connecting across generational lines around shared values and purpose. Comments on social media revealed how deeply this resonated with ordinary Americans. This is what real public service looks like. Watching Sanders acknowledge Crockett's work gives me hope for the future. Imagine if more of our political interactions were this respectful and substantive. News programs that typically focused on political conflict found themselves analyzing what had made this exchange so different. One commentator observed, "In a political environment that rewards performative outrage, Sanders and Crockett demonstrated something else entirely. A genuine commitment to the substance of governance and a respect that transcends generational and experiential differences." The timing proved especially meaningful, coming during a period of intense national cynicism about politics, when many Americans questioned whether anything beyond partisan positioning was possible in Washington. The Sanders-Crockett moment offered a tangible reminder of what public service at its best could look like. A poll conducted the following week found that 81% of Americans across party lines viewed the exchange positively. More significantly, 64% said it made them more hopeful about the possibility of substantive progress on economic challenges, despite deep political differences. For Sanders and Crockett themselves, the public response was both surprising and affirming. Sanders, in an interview days later, reflected, "What happened in that hearing room wasn't about me or Representative Crockett as individuals. It was about the values and vision that connect generations of Americans who believe in economic fairness and opportunity. Those values transcend any single political moment or career." Crockett, speaking to her constituents at a town hall, similarly noted the unexpected impact. "The response to that exchange has been overwhelming, and it tells me something important. Americans are hungry for substance over spectacle in their politics. They want to see their representatives engaged in real problem solving, rather than endless political positioning." The most immediate impact came in how ordinary citizens began thinking about intergenerational connections in their own communities. A community college in Michigan created an economic justice dialogue program that paired retired labor organizers with young activists to share knowledge and perspectives across generations. The program's director explicitly cited the Sanders-Crockett exchange as inspiration. Educational institutions took note as well. Several universities incorporated the exchange into courses on democratic deliberation and public service. A curriculum developer created materials for high schools titled "Continuing the Work: Intergenerational Progress for Justice," based on the interaction, helping students understand how social change movements build across generations. Local community organizations reported increased interest in mentorship programs, connecting experienced activists with younger community leaders. In a neighborhood in Philadelphia, a community development corporation launched a wisdom exchange, where residents of different generations shared their experiences and insights about economic challenges and potential solutions. 6 months after the hearing, Sanders and Crockett were invited to co-host a forum on economic justice at a historically black college. Despite their different backgrounds and experiences, they shared the stage to discuss how Americans across generations might work together to build a more equitable economy. "What Senator Sanders and I demonstrated wasn't revolutionary," Crockett told the audience. "It was simply a recognition that the work of justice doesn't belong to any single generation. Each generation builds upon the efforts of those who came before, while bringing new energy and insights to meet the challenges of their time." Sanders nodded in agreement. Throughout American history, progress toward a more just economy has never been linear. It's always been a relay race, with each generation carrying the work forward in their own way. What matters is that the fundamental vision of an economy that works for all, not just the privileged few, continues to animate our efforts across generations. The forum concluded with both leaders announcing the creation of the Intergenerational Justice Project, an initiative designed to connect experienced advocates with emerging leaders across the country. With support from community foundations and grassroots organizations, the project launched programs focused on economic opportunity, environmental justice, and democratic participation. In one rural community in Georgia, the local chapter brought together civil rights veterans and young organizers to address persistent economic disparities. As one young participant observed, learning from those who've been in this work for decades gives us perspective and wisdom we couldn't get elsewhere. And I think they gain energy and new approaches from us. It's truly a two-way exchange. A year after their exchange, both Sanders and Crockett were featured in a documentary examining how social movements sustain themselves across generations. Sanders reflected, "What gives me the most hope isn't any specific policy victory, but seeing new generations take up these fundamental questions of economic fairness and opportunity. Representative Crockett and others like her are not just continuing the work. They're advancing it with new insights and approaches." Crockett shared a similar perspective. Senator Sanders and his generation laid foundations that make our current work possible. They kept these issues alive during times when economic justice was dismissed as unrealistic or impractical. Our generation builds on that legacy while addressing the unique challenges of our time. Perhaps the most telling indicator of impact came from unexpected sources. A national foundation created a new fellowship program named for both Sanders and Crockett, designed to support collaborative work between experienced advocates and emerging leaders across diverse issue areas. When informed of the fellowship, both expressed being deeply moved. "That might be the greatest honor of my career," Sanders remarked, "because it recognizes what progress truly requires. Not individual heroics, but collaborative work across generations committed to a shared vision of justice." Crockett concurred, "I can't think of a better legacy than supporting new connections between those with deep experience and those bringing fresh energy and perspectives. That's how movements for justice sustain themselves and grow stronger over time." Everyday citizens continued finding meaning in their exchange. A high school teacher in Arizona described showing the video to her students. "In a political culture that emphasizes conflict and division, I wanted them to see what substantive engagement across differences could look like. The respect between Sanders and Crockett, despite their generational differences, offers a model of what citizenship at its best can be." A community organizer in Michigan shared how the exchange had influenced his approach to leadership development. "After seeing that interaction, we completely restructured our training program to create more intergenerational learning opportunities. We've found that when experienced organizers and younger activists genuinely engage with each other, both groups become more effective." The story of Sanders and Crockett serves as a powerful reminder that in democratic societies, the work of justice is always intergenerational, not a series of disconnected efforts, but a continuous relay where each generation builds upon and extends the work of those who came before. Their exchange demonstrated how respect and recognition across generational lines strengthens rather than diminishes the ongoing struggle for a more just and equitable society. As we conclude this remarkable story, we invite you to like and subscribe for more content that celebrates moments of wisdom and integrity in American public life. In a media landscape that often amplifies conflict and division, we're committed to highlighting examples of what's still possible when leaders choose a different path. America's economic challenges remain significant, and political differences about how to address them are real. But the Sanders-Crockett exchange reminds us that progress happens when we recognize and honor the contributions of different generations working toward shared ideals of justice and opportunity. In your own life and community, consider how you might apply the lessons from this powerful moment. How might you build connections across generational lines, honoring the wisdom of experience while embracing the energy and fresh perspectives of new voices? The future of our shared work for justice depends on our ability to see ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as part of an ongoing intergenerational effort to fulfill America's highest ideals.